saw you sitting a lazy Susan. My best friend said that you were moving on back home to Omaha. Nobody knows home like I do. I hope that it works out for you. Back home in Omaha, Nebraska. Wondering what someone like you is doing in a place like this, where the dirt just gets dirty and the mad just get pissed. Did your folks kick you out? Did you do something wrong? I hate to even ask, but are you running from the law? It got late and the bars were closing. Grabbed my hands and said you were frozen. Let's go home, back home to Omaha. I've noticed you staring at him, the kind of gaze that begs a reaction. True love, I don't know I did, but I followed. We were sitting on your couch, drank lots of gin. We started telling jokes, but you kept your gaze at him. I wondered if it came from something I had said. How when you leave a town, it's as good as being dead.
Hello, friends and fellow dome lovers. Hello, friends and dome lovers. It's a blustery day out here on the Olympic Peninsula in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm super excited to finally be giving you another full build video from Trillium Domes. I know it's been way too long. I've had a few too many irons in the fire. I'm not used to having to say no to every other thing or everything in order to keep my sanity, but I'm back to what is important, and that's building really cool stuff and showing you guys how we do it. So today we're diving into the details of a really cool project that Camille and I built with the help of my family for our folks up in Alaska during a time when we were doing a little bit of soul searching after the whole boat thing. So this dome sauna, built from our beginner Bucky ball plans, it turned out really well, and I'm pretty proud of it. Honestly, it might be the best example that I've seen yet of a dome that is a sauna that actually functions well. And I've gotten some good feedback on it from actual sauna connoisseurs. Saunosaurs? So this isn't the first dome sauna thing that I built, but it's a huge step forward from my last one. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of this project, I want you to know that I've fully updated and overhauled the beginner buckyball plans from which this was built. The updated plans include all the specs for this project that you're about to see exactly. It has a detailed materials list, it has every component that you see here, multiple deck options, the full sauna layout, and a fully illustrated step-by-step guide, of which you will see in video form here. Now, all our plans come with an option to get a 3D model that you can open in SketchUp. That has a free version. What this means is that you can scale, customize, and explore the 3D model, all these components on your computer, on your phone. You can customize stuff if you have the skills. You can draw new components in. Really, the sky's the limit. So all the 3D renders that you're going to see in the instructions and the components and everything in this video are included in that 3D model. If you have already purchased the plans in the past, all these improvements, all these additions, everything is yours totally free of charge. All you got to do is reply to your confirmation email showing that you got the plans, and I'll send you the new ones. Now, we did just implement a cool thing on the website. So for people who are buying the plans now, you'll be able to log in and always download the updated version. And as always, all the plans come with personal support from me should you need it. We've helped a ton of people achieve their dome dreams, and you can check tons of projects out on our website that are built from our plans from all over the world. Your support truly makes it possible for us to spend days, weeks, months building, drawing, buying materials, and everything. It just makes it all possible, and we really appreciate the support. Thank you. Okay, so I guess this story starts with my last hot dome project, and that was the Acorn Sauna Zone. And yeah, it works. It's a small space with a big fire inside. It gets hot. We've had some amazing parties in there. But sauna building is both an art and a science. So when I posted it online, people shared their suggestions and critiques, and I really appreciate that. We've also had a lot of other people build from those plans, and they all have great things to say about the little Acorn Zone. Now, the most common critique that I saw was, since the dome walls curve in, you can't build benches that go higher than the sauna heater. And it does matter because when the sauna is heating up, your feet will stay colder than your upper body. In our case, because it was such a small space, once the sauna is fully heated, the difference isn't really noticeable. But still, the point stands. The biggest downside for me personally was that there's no proper entryway or changing space. Hanging a towel works, but I wanted something a little bit more intentional and comfortable. So this next version, which is the subject of this video, was born from a desire to improve that design. I built it from the beginner buckyball plan simply because that was a video that I hadn't made yet. Originally, we wanted to build a combination sauna and a greenhouse using the 15-foot dome plans. One half enclosed and insulated for the sauna, and the other half is a greenhouse with a flagstone patio and an indoor-outdoor shower. This design has two key improvements: a sheltered, weather-protected entry changing area, and the central wall creates a flat surface to build proper sauna benches all the way up to the ceiling of the dome. But as it happens, my folks' yard in Southeast Alaska is pretty small, so we scaled it back to the 12-foot diameter beginner buckyball dome, which actually has a 10-foot diameter footprint. That cut us down from about 175 square feet to just 80. So as you watch this build and check out the updated plans, keep in mind, in the actual build, I started with a general idea for the bench heights and widths, and I kind of just freestyled it in place. That's somewhat unavoidable in such a small, round space, but after many iterations, I landed on a layout that I'm really proud of. And hey, this dome isn't just for saunas. People have used the beginner buckyball plans to build greenhouses, glamping pods, art studios already, you name it. You can always scale up the plans using the 3D model or do the math to go even bigger. So the best thing about the beginner buckyball is its simplicity. It's a stripped down version of our other dome designs. While those are made of pentagons and hexagons composed of individual triangles, which strengthens the structure, the beginner version skips that extra step and gives us flat pentagon and hexagon faces. We'll still need to make a few partial panels to create the doorway, but I'll show you a super easy way to do that. What that means in practice is that we only have one overall panel length and one bevel angle, so there are just two unique struts for the entire build. One for the pentagons and one for the hexagons. I also found a way to further simplify the process and skip the need for building any jigs. That makes this dome design the easiest one to build by far. Step 1. Cut your stock to length. We're starting with 2x4s and repping them in half to get 2 struts per board. You're totally welcome to use larger material if you'd like, but with the beveled method, we're limited by the cutting depth of a standard table saw. If you want more insulation than that, you have 2 options. Use the deep frame method, check out my other video on that, or build a scaled down dome inside of this dome to create a deeper insulation cavity. The deep frame method also skips the table saw entirely, but it is a bit more complex. I find the beveled method to be the most beginner friendly. Either way you go, you're going to want to cut your stock to length first. To do this, we look at the overall panel length in our plans. For example, if your overall panel length is 3 feet, you're okay to cut your stock at 3 feet because we're going to need to trim a little bit off each strut to make up for the overlap. Step 2, rip the bevel angle. After you've cut your stock to length, you're ready to rip your bevels. You'll want a digital angle finder for this. Set it to 90 degrees, then zero it out. Find the bevel angle listed in your plans and set your angle finder to that number, and use it to set the angle on your table saw blade. This makes sure that it's perfectly accurate. Since we're ripping 2x4s in half, start your cut just a little off center. That way, when you send the offcut through again, it trims just a little bit and both pieces end up the same exact width. Step 3, cut the initial miters. Now we're moving on to mitering. Pick a panel to start with, let's say a hexagon. The initial miter angle for a hexagon is 30 degrees, so set your miter saw to 30 degrees and trim just the end off each strut. Make sure you're cutting the miter correctly in relation to the bevel, so you're doing it on the correct side of the board each time. Once you have enough struts with that initial miter cut for all your hexagon panels, it's time to cut the final miters. Step 4, finding the location of the final miters without a jig. Instead, we're going to use a clean, flat surface like a big piece of plywood or a workbench and mark a straight reference line. This line represents your overall panel length. If the plan says 3 feet, make it a bit longer, like 4 feet, just to give yourself some room to work. Now mark 2 points along that line that match the actual panel length from the plans. Use your digital angle finder to draw 30-degree guidelines from each of those points. This just helps visually when you're laying out the panel. Grab 3 struts and lay them along your reference line, with the wide side down and the bevel facing outward. Each strut end will butt up to the back of the next, forming a loop. The first cut you made, the initial miter, is always the end that butts into the next strut. Since we haven't done the final miters yet, each strut will overhang just a little bit. What matters is that the strut is sitting exactly on the line. We will use this middle piece to mark and cut the final miter. Line it up carefully and then trace the overhanging tip where it extends past your mark. That's your cut line. Once you cut it flush, it'll fit perfectly between the other 2 ends. Now cut that strut at the marked angle. You can do this by setting the bevel and the miter angles on your saw to match the ones from the table saw and the initial cut. Or to be more precise, you can match the blade to the exact line you traced. Once the strut fits perfectly, you can use it as a template. Take it back to the saw and set up a stop block, which will help you make repeat cuts for all the other struts. A stop block can be as simple as clamping a piece of scrap wood at the right spot on your miter saw fence. Now you're ready to cut all the struts for your hexagons. I often make partial panels from full ones as well, so if you need 2 partial hexagons, go ahead and just make 2 full ones now. You'll trim them down later. Step 5, assemble the panels. I like to use GRK R4 screws. They're structurally rated and work great for this kind of joinery. Double check your panel's overall length on each side to make sure that everything is consistent. Step 6, make a partial panel. To make a partial panel, the easiest way is to start with a full one and then modify it. Say you're working with the pentagon. Grab a long strut and lay it diagonally across the panel where you want the cut, connecting the 2 corners where the partial will be formed. Place it so it's flush against the inside face of the panel. Now mark the inside edge of that strut on your panel. That's your cut line. Once you cut along that line, you'll have the perfect space to drop in your new partial panel strut. And then you can trim that to fit your panel flush. Some partial panels will need to be mirror images, like the ones that make up the doorway. Step 7, create corner blocks. Now this step's totally optional, but I found that it adds quite a bit of strength to the dome frame for very little effort or cost. I've included some simple measurements in the plans that use 2x4s, and they'll fit just about any size panel you're building from this geometry. The cuts are sharp angles, but don't worry, it's not too tricky if you set yourself up right. You can find the exact angles yourself by using a digital angle finder. Just extend it to the inside of your panel where the corners meet, then transfer that angle onto a 2x4 by bisecting it down the middle. You'll probably find that your miter saw can't quite hit the extreme angle you need while the board's flat against the fence. That's okay. Instead, adjust the saw to its max miter and rotate the 2x4 until the blade lines up with your drawn angle. Then instead of using the saw's built-in fence, screw a scrap board down to your workbench to act as an auxiliary fence. Once you've got your first cut made, flip the board and cut the other side to complete the block. Once you've got the setup dialed in, adding a stop block lets you bang out a whole stack of them quickly. Super fast, super repeatable. Step 8, cover the dome panels. Covering the dome panels is one of those steps that really depends on the materials you're using and the kind of finish you're going for. For insulated domes, I like to use 3/4 CDX plywood sheathing and a high quality roofing underlayment like Grace Ice and Water Shield. Now, unlike a conventional structure where the sheathing is a critical structural component, with the dome, the frame itself is already super strong. So the plywood here is really just to give you a surface to attach your roofing material. Because of that, it's totally fine to piece together your panels from smaller cuts of plywood. Don't sweat exposed seams too much. Though if one looks too floppy, you can always reinforce it with a piece of framing or use plywood clips. I've included a sheet layout diagram in the plans that shows the most efficient way to cut and lay out your plywood, which really helps reduce waste. For this build, we applied the underlayment before assembling the dome. That made it way easier. We made sure to leave a 6-inch overhang on all sides of the panel, but kept the backing on the overlapping sections so they wouldn't stick to themselves. Then, during assembly, we just peeled off the backing as we went, starting from the bottom to the top, overlapping like shingles. As long as the upper panels overlap the over panels, you've got a fully waterproof seal. A raindrop would have to travel against gravity through the sticky underlayment about 12 inches to get behind that assembly. If you're using transparent material like polycarbonate, you've got options. You can either buy oversized sheets and trim them or piece together multiple sections and support the seams with a block. I like to oversize the polycarbonate slightly and attach it with double-sided glazing tape, then trim it flush on the table saw using a simple jig. You can see my explanation of this jig in our ultimate dome building video here on YouTube. I usually cut it a blade's width shy of the panel, so there's a little gap between the neighboring pieces when the dome goes together. Step 9, creating the base sections. The base sections are made from 2 framing members joined in an L shape, a flat 2x4 on the bottom that gets screwed to the deck or foundation, and an upright 2x6 that lifts the dome a bit and gives you some more headroom for the door, while interfacing with the dome frame. The bottom 2x4 is a straightforward long point to long point miter. The upright 2x6 gets a bevel on the top edge, short side facing out, and miters on each end to fit neatly in the dome's base layout. The easiest way I've found is to cut the miters first and then rip the bevel along the top edge. For this build, there's 2 different lengths of base section, and the ones on either side of the door opening get a slightly special miter cut to match that geometry. Once built, these base sections give you a strong, secure foundation to attach the dome to. Step 10, build the deck. Building the deck can go a few different ways depending on your goals. If you want the deck to match the dome footprint exactly, you've got 2 main paths. You can build it radially like I show in the video, or you can build a more conventional layout using the angles and measurements I provide in the plans. Option 3 is probably the simplest, which is to build a regular rectangular deck and then place the dome on top of it. What you would do is build a rectangular deck on regular spacing and then set the base sections of the dome on top of that framing. Everything inside the base sections gets a subfloor, and everything outside those base sections gets an outdoor deck board material. The radial deck is easier to prefab and transport. It does look pretty cool, but it gets covered up anyway. But it's a bit more work to insulate and sheathe. The conventional method's a bit easier to sheathe and insulate with conventional materials, but pretty much every joist has to be some weird angle cut. In the plans, I've included measurements and angles for both methods. If you're laying out your footings, the easiest way is to assemble the rim joist or the base ring on the ground and mark where each footer goes. One in the middle for a radial layout, and footers at all corners is usually plenty. Footer type really depends on your soil, climate, frost line depth. Since this structure is lightweight and in a sheltered spot, we just use basic pier blocks. But the footers really work the same way for any deck, so you can do your research on that or ask a local builder in your area. For insulation, foam board works great in this situation because it doesn't mind moisture. And I always recommend laying down a vapor barrier underneath the deck to keep ground moisture from under your structure. As for the actual floor, 3/4 inch tongue and groove plywood is my go-to, but you could also use tongue and groove boards or car decking if you're looking for a specific look. Step 11, assembling the base sections. I like to assemble the whole base ring before attaching it to the deck. It's a lot easier to work with when it's one solid unit, but isn't attached to the deck so that you can move it around. Just screw all the base pieces to each other and use a temporary placeholder board across the doorway opening to keep it the right distance apart. Once that's done, start by screwing down the section at the back of the dome opposite the doorway. Then measure across to the doorway side and adjust your placeholder board so that everything lines up with the plans. Work your way around the ring, fastening opposite corners and checking the measurements against the plans as you go. Now that the base is in place, you're ready to raise the dome. Step 12, assemble the dome panels. This is the fun part, the one where it all starts to feel real. You'll want at least one helper, maybe two, and a small stepladder for reaching the upper panels. I like to use GRK R4 screws or Timberlock style lag screws to join the panels together. You can also go old school with through bolts, washers, and nuts if you want. Start at the back of the dome, again, opposite the doorway, and work your way from the bottom up using the exploded view in the plans as your guide. If you want some extra strength, a little construction adhesive between the panels never hurts, but it's not strictly necessary if you're using proper fasteners. I usually just tack everything together with a couple screws per joint and then go back to add more once the dome is fully assembled. A screw every 6 inches on center is a good rule of thumb. Once everything is standing, go ahead and finish overlapping your roofing underlayment and start sealing up those polycarbonate seams. My go-to is structural sealant like Sikaflex, but 100% silicone works too. A 1/8 to 3/16 to a quarter gap is ideal for caulking. I like to mask off the seams with painter's tape, apply the sealant, and then pull the tape once it's tacky. That leaves a super clean line and a sharp look. Step 13, frame the doorway. Now that the dome is sealed up, we can turn our attention to the big old hole in the front. I designed this doorway frame so that it just drops into the gap left by the missing panels in the dome geometry. The version that I include in the plans is a bit beefier than what you're going to see in this video. I upgraded it to 2x4s and 3/4 inch plywood for a better structure, and it will be easier to build as well. Once you've assembled it into one piece, it should just slide into place. You can screw it with structural screws, and any gaps between the frame of the dome can be spray foamed and then wrapped with the underlayment to tie it into the weatherproofing of the dome. I've included measurements for a custom door that fits that opening, and hanging it pretty much just works like a regular door install. Nothing fancy there. At this point, we wrapped up our first building session. My dad carried on with a few things while we were away, and this is where it gets kind of interesting. He had access to some free roughs on cedar, which is amazing, but he milled all the interior cladding by ripping narrow strips off the short edge of the board on the table saw, and that left us with 2-inch wide cedar strips. Kind of pretty, but not ideal for fitting each little piece into the dome's unique shapes. It did work, but it definitely wasn't the most efficient approach, so keep that in mind as we move on to the next step. Step 14, insulate and clad the dome. Here's where we can really start to play with the repeatable shapes and the panelized thinking again. The same methods we use to build the exterior panels can be applied to the interior cladding, and they can be prefabricated too, which is a huge time saver. Now, I do wish that we would have had wider boards to work with because that would have meant fewer cuts and less fiddling, but when it's free cedar, you just don't complain. I use the same reciprocal principles to cut matching pieces and staple them together and work as a template for the interior panels. The staples are just there to hold things long enough to install the cladding onto the panel frame and hold it together. I also built these frames a 1/4 inch shy of the edge on each side so that there was no conflict when installing them. These gaps will later get covered by trim super easy and fast. To fill in the cladding and get some measurements for my repeat cuts, I started in the middle of each panel. I cut the first 2 pieces to fit, and then I measured the difference between them. That told me how the taper was progressing. So with that difference, I made a list of all the cuts that I needed to get to the other side of the panel. And because I started in the middle, those cuts would work for both sides. With the stop block on the saw, I could run through those pieces pretty fast. Again, nothing had to be perfect because we were trimming everything over later. Once we had all the panels ready, we could install them with some insulation. Now there's some difference of opinion about how to build out a sauna properly, especially around the vapor barriers. One school of thought says that you need a vapor barrier between your interior cladding and your insulation to protect your insulation in your wall cavity. And another school of thought says that the sauna wall should be able to breathe. I personally was worried that the vapor barrier might trap moisture between the barrier and the roofing underlayment, so I opted to let the panels breathe and dry out with regular heating cycles. There's not necessarily a right way to do it, but the cool thing is the dome structure supports either approach just fine. So I would encourage you to do some research on YouTube, maybe get a sauna building book, decide what details you want to do, and they'll all be implementable on this design. All right, now that all the interior cladding is installed, we're on to the next exciting phase of the sauna build, the interior details. That brings us to step 15, building the interior wall. Before we dive in, let's talk about what this wall actually does. It's not structural in the way that you might think. It doesn't support the dome, and it really doesn't even need to support the benches much, since those are pretty much freestanding. The main job of this wall is to just separate the hot room from the changing room. It helps with insulation, it gives us a surface to attach the bench framing to, and creates a nice visual divide between the two spaces. In this video, I show details of how I frame this wall in place, but to make things super easy, I also laid out every cut you'll need in the build plans. So if you don't feel like freestyling it, just follow the cuts and frame it up piece by piece. Here's how I tackled it. I started by setting up a 360-degree builder's laser level to project a line around the whole interior of where I wanted the wall to meet the dome. These little lasers are getting more affordable all the time, and in a space this small, even a basic one works great. That said, if all you have is a good old-fashioned spirit level, that will do the trick. It'll just take a little bit more patience. Once I had my plumb line marked all the way around the dome, I fastened the bottom plate along the line on the floor, and then I started piecing together the top plate along the same line along the dome frame. You're basically creating a ring that follows the curve of the dome, but I can't stress enough that these cuts do not need to meet perfectly or have perfectly cut angles on them. They're just the termination point for the wall studs, and they're going to get completely covered up. No one will ever see them. So don't feel like you need to spend a bunch of time getting this perfect. Save that energy for the interior cladding and the trim. With the plates in place, I marked out the door opening and then laid out the studs 16-inch on center, just like a standard wall, onto the bottom plate. I used the laser again to shoot plumb lines from the floor to the ceiling so I could get exactly where the studs intersected with the top plate. Then it was just a matter of measuring from point to point, scribing the angle onto the 2x4, cutting it, and fastening everything in place. Once the wall was framed and solid, it's time for the real fun part. And that brings us to step 16, laying out the sauna benches. I played around with a few different bench designs before landing on this one. It's definitely a bit quirky and maybe a little bit more complex than it needed to be, but I think it works really well with the geometry of the dome, and it's super functional. I've detailed this design thoroughly in the plans and in the 3D model, so you can follow it exactly if you want, but if you want to riff a bit and come up with your own style, that works too, and you can probably get away with something a little simpler. One thing I realized after the fact is that the space under the benches that are connected to the interior wall could be a good spot for storage or utilities. Something to keep in mind as you're planning. To build the bench framing, a lot like the interior wall, we start with the plates and ledgers. This is basically where the vertical and horizontal members of the bench intersect with our existing structure. I used the laser again and I hung it off the wall at the height of our finished bench minus a 2x4 and the bench cladding. So I'd be left with a clean finished height once everything was installed. With those lines in place, I cut and fastened all the ledger boards around the dome and onto the interior wall. Next, I measured outward from the wall and the dome frame the depth that I wanted for the benches. And then I dropped a few plumb lines down to the floor using the laser or a spirit level. This gave me the exact locations to fasten my floor plates. Once the bottom plates are in, I cut vertical 2x4s to go up to the ledger height. These make up the bench studs. Now you can start connecting those to the ledgers with horizontal framing members. Once you have your horizontal pieces in, you've basically got a bench seat that's ready for cladding. Wherever I could, I framed using flat 2x4s so I could fasten the bench cladding from the underside. This part of the build definitely felt more like art than science, and honestly, it was a blast. If you're more of a building novice, this might be the perfect day to invite that one carpenter friend over, maybe entice them with a 6-pack and a sauna session when it's all done. Even if you follow my plans exactly, I can almost guarantee that your benches will end up a little bit different than mine, and that's totally okay. The only thing that really matters is that they're safe, solid, and high enough to get people's butts up in the air. That's where all the magic happens. As you can probably imagine, there were a lot of pieces and parts that had to come together to make this whole project happen. Between all the trips in and out, different people who lent a hand, and the fact that it spanned nearly 2 years, it honestly blows my mind that we got as far as we did. And the funny thing is, it's still not technically done. I'll admit I don't have the most organized footage of the entire build. There were plenty of moments where the camera just wasn't a priority and I had to let it go and focus on the work. So if it feels a bit jumpy at times, I'm sorry, I did my best. I do want to give a huge shout out to Homecraft Saunas for their incredible sauna heater. We went with their Revival Series 9 kilowatt model, and this thing really delivers. Not only does it perform beautifully, but it looks really good inside the dome. Their wiring kit made the whole installation super straightforward. We filled it up with rocks that we gathered ourselves off the beach, and it gets up to 190 degrees Fahrenheit way faster than I expected. I really can't recommend Homecraft enough. They make top tier equipment and they make it in North America. So for me, it felt like an added benefit to be supporting our Canadian friends. Since we left Alaska, my family's been adding their own touch to the project. They installed a few more benches in the changing room and started dressing up the exterior a bit more. They added cedar cladding over a rain screen assembly on the lower panels, and the plan is to eventually cover the rest of the dome in moss. They already started on one section, and I gotta say, it looks really cool. From here, it's probably gonna be more of a slow burn family project. I don't think any of us are in a super big hurry to see it completely finished, because really the big milestone has already been hit. It's a fully functional, beautiful, unique sauna that we all get to enjoy. And believe it or not, I'm already cooking up plans for the next sauna. I've got a fresh design in mind, and I'm really excited to share that build with you step by step when the time comes. Which brings me to where we will be building that sauna.